Baldur's Gate 3 is a game full of strange, weird, or wacky cutscenes, dialogue choices, and characters. Things that most players will never actually find, or when they do, will be in awe at what is happening. I've already touched on so many of these in this video, but there is one specific scene we haven't talked about yet that is unlike anything else in the game and might be the single most haunting experience in the series. A moment so peculiar, so horrific, that it will send shivers down your spine and still is shrouded in mystery as to what's even going on. One of fans' favorite companions breaks the fourth wall. You see, months after Baldur's Gate 3's original release, YouTuber Chublot noticed a very strange interaction that could happen in-game when searching through and messing with the file system. When using a specific set of console commands to allow archived files to be used, you can trigger a cutscene with Karlach that calls literally everything into question. Starting like any normal conversation with this lovable Zariel tiefling barbarian, Karlach mentions that while spending time in Avernus, she learned from some of the archdevil ruler Zariel's clerics the ability to discern whether the person she was speaking to was telling the truth, a sort of magic trick. But if you allow her to use this so-called trick on you, suddenly things take a very strange turn. Karlach looks directly into the camera, not at the player character, but at you, and the camera pans close to her face. An ominous feeling begins to take hold as Karlach asks, "What's happening here?" And as you poke and prod more, asking Karlach what she's even doing, she starts to dive into questions about the grand design, destiny, love, and the bounds of reality and existence itself. Suddenly, out of nowhere, she inquires if this is your first time playing the game, if you know her, love her. And as your heart begins to beat faster and faster, with a creepy smile on her face, Karlach asks you the final question. Are you having fun?
You're having fun, aren't you?
If you answer yes, she seems pleased and happy, and just as quickly as the moment began, it ends, and the Karlach we know and love seems to come back to her senses, unaware of what just happened. It's far and away the creepiest scene in the entire game, where one second you think you're having a normal conversation with a companion, and the next you are contemplating the meaning of life while staring into the lifeless eyes of a video game character that is curious about your real life as a human being. The thing is though, most players will never actually see this scene. As I mentioned before, it currently can only be triggered with console commands or by sifting through the downloaded files in-game yourself. But nonetheless, this discovery has led some in the community on a search to see if this scene can be triggered in the base game as well. After all the voice lines, dialogue, character animations, and writing is there. It's a fully fleshed out and finished scene, we just don't know how to trigger it. So the even bigger question then is, why is this even here in the first place? This isn't some creepypasta or accident that is simply a note left by the developers. This is a full-on scene that would have had to have gone through multiple groups at Larian in order to become this polished in the first place. Well, our first clue is in the files we can find in the scene for the game. Inside some of the raw JSON data in strings, we can find a how to trigger flag, which has a value that literally says, currently cannot be triggered. To be discussed with Sarah what to do on this branch. For those of you who don't know, this Sarah being referred to in the data is most likely none other than Sarah Bayless, the writer at Larian who was in charge of Karlach, and if we take it at face value, this most likely means this branch of code was meant to be checked out of production but somehow got left in, either by accident or on purpose. But the bigger question for me still is why? Why is this even something that was made at all? Was it just a bit of fun the Larian developers were having, a fun Easter egg that was going to be included but was decided against? Or could it be that there really is something very sinister and otherworldly happening with Karlach? And could it point to an even bigger conspiracy in all of Baldur's Gate 3 about a fantasy world that not only reacts to what we do, but to us as living, breathing people as well? And what could this commentary all mean? Especially considering many players online claim to actually have triggered this event in the base game with no mods or console commands at all. It's a fascinating, albeit somewhat terrifying find, and is so rare that for months players in the community thought the entire thing was a hoax and fake. But I still think that somewhere out there, the real Karlach, the one that knows she is trapped inside a video game, is having an existential crisis in need of our help. Lenore de Hurst might be one of the most interesting characters in Baldur's Gate 3, despite the fact that we never actually get to see her. And that's because the story of Lenore and the questions of what happened to her have been on my mind ever since my first playthrough of the game. And even over a year later, this mystery still lingers on, with a lot of potentially big ramifications to the series as a whole. For those of you who don't know, Lenore was a devoted cleric of Mystra who for years lived in the arcane tower of the Underdark, researching the magical properties of the harsh and mysterious underground, as well as interacting with things like sussur flowers on the daily to record magical experiments. The exact specifics of why she was in this tower still remain unknown, and some in the community even speculate that there may have been some sort of top secret mission that was being developed. But as far as we're aware, it was just Lenore's passion to understand the Underdark as a powerful arcane user. Where things start to get weird though is the disappearance of this woman, and how no one knows where she's gone. You see, originally during her stay at the Arcane Tower, Lenore was aided by her beloved partner, Ur, a gnomish inventor and tinkerer who actually is credited as the creator of multiple items we can use in-game, like the Water Sparkers, Lifebringer, Blast Pendant, and Jolt Shooter. But at some point, the two lovers had a falling out, and this resulted in Ur leaving the tower to pursue his dreams of studying lightning and storm magic, while Lenore stayed behind and fell into a deep depression, writing poetry daily, all of which we can find in the tower while we explore, as well as building Bernard, a construct guardian infused with magic that defends the arcane tower and can prove to be a difficult fight for any of you who tried to best him at the peak of the tower when you met. In-game, you can actually even trick Bernard into thinking you're Lenore using passcodes. But regardless, it's clear from not only Bernard and other defenses and all of the volumes of text we can find in the Arcane Tower libraries that after Ur left, things took a turn for the worst. We also know that during this time, Lenore's pet dog Myrna, her only friend at the time, died, and she created a grave for the puppy nearby, which we can find in-game by the Dread Hollow. While digging this grave for her puppy, we can also find clues that Lenore befriended and became enamored with a boulette that kept going nearby the gravesite, which we can also find in-game when we arrive years later, still alive and aggressively defending the dog's tomb. The real tragedy though comes after this, when Lenore received an invitation to join a magic convention at the city of Baldur's Gate, after which she wrote a note and left it in the Arcane Tower for Ur, which told him how much she loved him and asked him to wait for her to return if he did find it. And just as expected, Ur did return and find the note, but after waiting year after year without Lenore ever returning, he eventually gave up and Lenore was never seen again. This has led many in the community to wonder, what exactly happened to Lenore? We do know that the experiments going on in the Arcane Tower likely involve more than we even know, but we see no actual indications that anyone wanted to harm Lenore at all. And on top of this, Lenore left behind lots of valuables she would have been very attached to, like the ring, the Sparks Wall, and the hidden basement, which likely means she most definitely intended to make her way back to the Arcane Tower at some point. And the way she left things on the ground or even her bed implies heavily that she assumed she would be back very quickly as well. One theory during early access actually speculated that Lenore may have been eaten by the boulette, as during early access when slaying the beast, if you searched its body, you could find a slippery chain shirt, implying that the boulette ate someone, which in this instance would most likely be Lenore, who does have similar armor in the Arcane Tower for herself. However, Larian removed this piece of clothing from the boulette's inventory on full release of the game, and considering everything else we read about the boulette and Lenore is very friendly, it seems like a boulette's sacrifice or accident was not Larian's intention for Lenore. More compelling evidence can be found in Act 3 though, where in the vaults below Ramesses Tower in the lower city, we can find a small note written by Lenore addressed to the wizard Lorcan, which states that she has been visited by a strange extraplanar individual, potentially Tarkin from Divinity Original Sin 2, who gave her a view into the universe, hinting that Lenore may have actually followed him into other dimensions. This heavily implies that Lenore is traveling through time and space into other dimensions entirely and has left the Forgotten Realms, leaving her lover and blessed Arcane Tower forever vacant. But for me, this sequence of events opens up even more questions and answers. For example, what was this strange extraplanar individual's fascination with Lenore in the first place? Could it have to do with the research she was doing at the Arcane Tower? We know in the tower itself that there are secret rooms and multiple traps along with Bernard and an entire force of defense constructs. So this all implies that something is going on here that we don't quite have all the puzzle pieces to. And personally, I find this really fascinating because on my original playthrough of Baldur's Gate 3, I always felt like the Arcane Tower was missing something. It felt like this place was more important or impactful outside of just some environmental storytelling you can piece together. And I think Lenore's strange disappearance proves that very much is the case. Other theories in the community have come up with ideas like the fact that Lenore may actually be Omelum, the friendly mind flayer you can find in the Underdark who is studying fungi, or even that Lenore never existed in the first place. But either way, I have a funny feeling that Lenore, just like Tarkin from Divinity Original Sin 2, who apparently travels through multiple times and dimensions, may just have a funny way of finding their way into showing up in Larian's next game and giving us more clues as to what's really going on. And if I had to harbor some sort of guess, it would be that the Arcane Tower and the research Lenore was doing is into a multiverse or extra-dimensional portal to other realms that can link all past and future Larian games. As the son of Mephistopheles, the archdevil ruler of Khania, 8th layer of the 9 hells in the world of the Forgotten Realms, which we play in Baldur's Gate 3, you would expect Raphael to be quite the conniving and evil devil. And well, he is. But what a lot of players don't realize is just how horrifyingly competent this Cambion may be, setting forth many of the events in the story of Baldur's Gate and enacting a plan so grand that the end of Baldur's Gate 3 might just be the beginning. You see, for those of you unaware, in Baldur's Gate 3, one of the central story points revolves around the Crown of Karsus. This ancient artifact constructed by an arch-wizard of the fallen magical empire of Netheril was used by a young Netherese mage named Karsus, who sought to return his empire to their former glory by stealing the divinity of the goddess of magic, Mistral, the same deity who later was reborn as Mistra, Gale's lover in-game. But by stealing Mistral's divinity, the weave of magic defending the mortal world became unstable, and the floating cities of Netheril fell from the sky, and the great civilization was lost to the sands of time. During this period of chaos, Raphael's father, Mephistopheles, obtained the crown of Karsus for himself, and hid it away in one of his many vaults of great power within the realms of hell. For Raphael, though, he sought to use this crown for his own ambition, to subjugate all 9 layers of hell under his eternal rule so that they would work together to conquer the multiverse. And despite how much this plan proves Raphael's hubris, that doesn't mean he isn't also patient. After all, simply walking into the vault to steal the crown under his father's nose would most likely result in his eternal torment. And trying to get other extraplanar beings to help him might result in backstabbing or the plan being revealed. So Raphael had to turn to other measures, the mortal realm. We know that at the end of Baldur's Gate 3, Raphael proposes a deal of sorts. He will give us the Orphic Hammer to release Orpheus, who can defeat the Emperor and Netherbrain only if we promise to give him the crown of Karsus in return. If we accept, this works out perfectly for Raphael. But the key here is how we even got to this point in the first place, Raphael's grand plan. We know that the crown of Karsus was originally in Mephistopheles' possession, but was stolen by the Dead Three under the planning of Gortash and used to control the Netherbrain under Moonrise Towers. But how did the Dead Three pull off a feat such as this? Could it be with a little shadowy help from a Cambion known as Raphael, with a very clear reason to let them have it? By ceding the crown to the Dead Three, Raphael knew he would not only be able to trick his father and antagonist, but also your party into rising to save the day, needing the Orphic Hammer in the final hour to win, thus giving Raphael control of the crown while circumventing his father and adversaries entirely, and now having a weapon of pure mind control. We know too that Raphael was making up contingency plans as well, as we can see when we catch him talking with and leading Mole all throughout the game, likely in a bid to turn her into an evil servant of sorts that can steal the crown if need be, just like she stole the idol from the Druids in Act 1. And it all goes to show that Raphael really does live up to his birthright, showing that he is a devil that thinks one step ahead, just like his father. And it also makes me wonder about the role of Mole and Arabella, as we will see in this next section, for potential sequels to Baldur's Gate 3. Because as grand as the conspiracy of the Dead Three and Elderbrain turning everyone into Mind Flayers is, there are other players at work here like Raphael, who in the shadows are pulling the strings more than we ever knew, and might be the key to where the Forgotten Realms lore is going next. However, only time will tell. While I've already touched on so many strange characters or NPCs in Baldur's Gate 3, none of them come close to the intrigue behind our next guest, Withers. This skeleton man with a dry sense of humor is known by most players as the guy at camp that lets me respect. And I don't blame them. Withers constantly speaks in riddles, says nonsensical things, and tends to regard the player as if they were totally irrelevant and meaningless when compared to the grandiose corpse standing before them. But what if I told you there was a reason for this? And that with Withers, there is a lot more than meets the eye, and the zombified shell of death at our camp might actually be the most powerful force we come into contact with throughout the entire game, with a plan so great it could affect all of Faerun. To prove this point though, we need to discuss who Withers really is, a topic many in the community have already proven and talked about endlessly, but let's go over it here so we're all on the same page. First of all, we initially find Withers in the crypt just outside our crash zone in Act 1, hidden underground in a temple of sorts dedicated to the god of death, Jurgal. We know this because inside the temple is a large statue which, if you pass a religion check, is identified as that of Jurgal, an ancient and mysterious figure. And even more so, scattered all around the entire area are libraries full of text in ancient tongues and riddles, all of which also point to Jurgal and his now long gone followers. As to how this ties to Withers though, our first clue is actually on his tombstone, which has a plaque that reads, "Here lies the Guardian of Tombs." For those of you who don't know, in Forgotten Realms lore, this is one of the main titles of Jurgal himself. And even more convincingly, when Withers steps out of the sarcophagus, if you try to damage him, you literally can't. And on top of that, he has infinite health. This isn't just a random skeleton you're dealing with, it's something much more powerful. Something like, say, a god of death, Jurgal. But just this on its own doesn't quite prove it. For that, we need a little more in-game evidence too. For example, when speaking to Withers in camp as a paladin, if you pass a D20 skill check, you will pick up on the fact that he actually contains a divine aspect, which are only held by powerful extraplanar beings like deities, primordials, and demon lords. And if you weren't already convinced, not only is there a post-credit scene and Dark Urge one where Withers all but confirms he is Jurgal firsthand, but in the in-game files themselves, he is referred to as Jurgal, not Withers, in many blocks of code. So without a shadow of a doubt, Withers is in fact a Jurgal. It really isn't all that hidden when you look at the evidence in-game, of which there's a whole extra hour's worth I could go over, but hopefully I gave you some of the most convincing to prove my point. Because the more fascinating question then becomes, what on earth is Jurgal of all people doing in our campaign, and what's his end goal? Well, before we get to that, some of you might still be wondering, who exactly is Jurgal anyways, and why does it matter if Withers is actually him? In the Forgotten Realms canon, Jurgal is depicted as a member of an ancient alien race that resembles a cross between a human and praying mantis, that has taken on the form of a mummified corpse. Sound familiar? But more interestingly, Jurgal also has a direct attachment to the Dead Three, the main antagonists along with the Elder Brain and Emperor of Baldur's Gate 3. And that's because many eons ago, after presiding over reality as the Lord of the End of Everything, Jurgal grew bored of his powers. Older than even most of the greater gods of Faerun, he was an alien being that simply did not want power anymore. After all, what else is there to do once you have become the literal herald of the cycle of life? So in order to break free from the chains he saw himself in, and after they asked, he bestowed his powers upon each of the gods of the Dead Three so that he could finally sleep and not worry about his powers any longer. In the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, which is a region sourcebook made by Wizards of the Coast that gives a lot of background lore on the Forgotten Realms, we can find this passage, which is a direct quote from Jurgal himself to the Dead Three during this transition. "The throne is yours. I have grown weary of this empty power. Take it if you wish. I promise to serve and guide you as your seneschal until you grow comfortable with the position. Who among you shall rule?" So each of the Dead Three was given an aspect of Jurgal's divinity. For Bane, it was his strife and tyranny. For Myrkul, death. And for Baal, murder. And with these newfound powers, Jurgal served as a seneschal, one of the greatest of all time, only behind Abelard from Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader. Regardless though, Jurgal shepherded in a new era of powerful gods who are the catalyst for everything happening in each of the Baldur's Gate games so far. So it's clear that Jurgil himself has a very direct and important tie-in to the events of Baldur's Gate 3, literally birthing the very people we're up against. But as you're probably now asking yourself, why is he helping us then? Well, remember how Jurgil is the lord of the end of everything? What that really means is that it's Jurgil's job to make sure the cycle of souls going from life to death continues on. After all, it's those very souls that power the gods themselves. For example, in those books we find in the crypt in Act 1, you can see NPCs' names and gods etched next to one another, record keeping for the scribe of death Jurgil to know where each goes. The reason he is awoken and is helping your party against the Dead Three is that they're breaking this cycle. By using a controlled elder brain to subjugate all living creatures to slavery via seramorphosis into illithids, the Dead Three are also stripping away the souls of these creatures as it is consumed by the tadpoles. But why would they do this? After all, Bal, Merkel, and Bane are gods themselves. To turn everyone illithid would mean they too are stripped of their godly powers. Well, as we briefly mentioned earlier on this list, if you cast the Speak with the Dead spell on Gortash after you've killed him, you speak with Bane. And if you ask Bane why they are doing this, he gives us a definitive answer, saying that sometimes the best way to win is not to gain power for yourself, but rather to strip your enemies of theirs. This strongly implies that the real plan of the Dead Three is to turn all of Faerun into illithid mind flayers that they have control over, thus stripping all gods in existence of their fuel, their engine. In this vacuum of power, as far as I can tell, there would be nothing but mortals. But 3 of those mortals would have an entire army of mind flayers at their beck and call. A world where the Dead Three can rule without answer, with no equals to challenge them. The reason Withers, Jurgil, helps us is that he cannot let this happen. The cycle he has bound himself to protect, even after releasing his powers to others, must be maintained. Withers knows that in their hubris, the Dead Three are willing to cast aside the very thing that makes them special in the first place, and he is back to once again right the wrongs of the world. And it makes one specific scene with Withers after you meet him originally so much more poignant, where when asking him why he is here to help, he simply replies, "Be assured it is not by choice." Because Withers does not have a choice. As the lord of all things that end, he must make sure they continue doing so. But we aren't quite done yet, because there is one more line, the very first in fact you hear from Withers, that might imply an even more crazy conclusion. You see, when Withers first steps out of his crypt all the way back in Act 1, he greets the player and companions by saying, "So he has spoken, and so thou standest before me, right as always." Who exactly is this he who has spoken? We know Withers is Jurgil, and we know Jurgil is an all-powerful deity who controls the literal cycle of death. So what kind of power would a being like this answer to? Because based on this single line alone, Withers has been commanded not of his own volition, but by something else. Not only does this recontextualize the previous quote we went over, the "be assured it is not by choice" one, but it implies that there are even greater forces at work that we are currently unaware of. Forces so powerful, so horrifying, that they make alien god deities who can't be killed bow before them. And you know, throughout our time with Withers, we see him sometimes leave to do things he never speaks about, or help characters like Arabella, who by the end of the game, we can find in a dark cave surrounded by bodies and blood, saying they are searching for something after getting close to Withers. Potentially, everything Withers says, does, and implies is nothing but a red herring. A shadow to mask the true intentions of a being behind him who is pulling the strings like a puppet master. And considering just how powerful Withers is, the thought of something even greater cannot be ignored. But considering Larian have said they will not be making another Baldur's Gate game, we may never get to see what that potential being is and was.